The U.S. Senate is a top-of-mind story, no doubt.
The Dan York State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
Welcome aboard. Nice to have you in. We've got a lot of things going on when it comes to the senior chamber. I don't know, is that how you refer to the Senate? I don't know. I've got a scholar on that, which is all U.S. Senate, that will straighten me out on that tonight. Nice to have you in. Thanks very much for tuning into my State of Mind on this Thursday evening in the fall. It's a rainy day, but it's a bright outlook for those who are announcing for office because they see themselves as winning your favor. And of course, there are those who are a little jammed up already. Roy Moore is certainly one. He probably never thought himself to be the national figure that he has become for the reasons that you don't want to become a national figure. We'll get some consult on that. And we had a big announcement today where what I have called one of the few Republican blue chip candidates out here in Rhode Island announced for U.S. Senate. So let's start with that before we introduce our guest. Simply, let's roll the video.
Well, it's time to end the suspense. I'm here today to announce my candidacy for election to the United States Senate.
And it's always exciting. In a warehouse building in Central Falls that I was hoping the floor would hold up for, a nice little crowd was in to applaud Bob Flanders in his predicted announcement to run for U.S. Senate. Professor Richard Arenberg is here, who has, worked in the Senate, writes about the Senate. Timing is everything. We brought you in to talk about what was going on with Roy Moore, and didn't know we'd have to talk about Al Franken or a mistrial with Bob Menendez in New Jersey.
It's all Senate.
But it's all Senate all the time. Welcome. Nice to have you.
Good to see you again.
Thought on Flanders trying to take on Sheldon Whitehouse?
Well, obviously he's a credible candidate. An election. Maybe we'll have a vigorous election here in Rhode Island. There's nothing I've seen so far that suggests that there's much vulnerability for Senator Whitehouse, but that's why we have elections.
Well, vulnerability is an interesting word because I certainly understand what you're saying, and I have wondered out loud why Bob Flanders is going to take this on. Well, we'll get an answer tomorrow night because he'll appear on the show. He'll be sitting right here with me, and we'll talk about it. The term vulnerability is kind of interesting in today's context, right? Because vulnerability seems to be personal behavior problems versus stands on policy and issues.
That's true, and the picture can change very suddenly. And the election isn't until November of next year. And that's a lifetime in politics. So, if you have a credible campaign, anything can happen. But again, if you just look at polling results and the kind of career that the senators had, and the political coloration of the state of Rhode Island, it's hard to believe that Senator Whitehouse is in any real political danger unless things change dramatically. They always can.
So it gets me to wonder, does Bob Flanders know something we don't know? And I don't really mean that in terms of, what did Sheldon do when he was 14? I'm not talking about that. Does he know something I don't know? Trump reportedly, according to Alan Fung's poll, sits at 37%, kind of commensurate with approval rating, commensurate with the rest of the country.
Yes.
I don't see Flanders latching on to Trump. He's not that kind of guy, like disposition-wise.
Right.
But, a senior Republican who is advising him, one who's pretty much, under the radar, but pretty smart, a guy who I respect, said to me today after the announcement in Central Falls, he said, this is one we can get. And I said, tell me the logic, because I'm not seeing it. He said, you know what? I think people are offended by the polarization. I think they are offended by even Sheldon Whitehouse's aggressive disposition. He said, I think people are going to find Flanders to be a guy who's going to see both sides, and I think people are craving that. I said, well, okay, I don't know. I just
I'm unconvinced.
Yeah.
I'm unconvinced.
I can't even figure out what the mindset and the appetite of the electorate is right now.
Yeah, and typically, look, everybody runs on reaching across the aisle. Every presidential candidate does. Most congressional candidates do. Most of them run against Washington. They say, all those crooks down there, send me to Washington, and I'll straighten it out. But then they run a highly polarized campaign, a highly negative campaign. The electorate polarizes, and we've got this kind of tribalism going on in our national politics.
And tribalism
right now.
is not just political party. There's economics, there's psychographics involved in it. I'll tell you, to your point, I had to get a kick out of this because I'm at the announcement today for Bob Flanders, and he has two of his close friends who are doing the pre-introductions and all that, and they're talking about this practical and serious guy and the typical Washington partisan fighting and all that, and not a breath later. One of his friends suggests that he'd rather have a beer with Bob than a Chardonnay with Sheldon.
Yeah.
And then, later, Bob Flanders suggests that it's time to bring silver-spooned Sheldon home.
Yeah. Well,
so they can't help themselves, and it seems to be the provable traction. You got to stick something on an incumbent, right? You got to stick a moniker on his chest.
Sure. They all run on the negative side. I mean, I always say, look, I worked for Paul Tsongas way back in '78.
Who hardly ever did that.
When he ran against Ed Brooke, and that was the last competitive Senate race anywhere in the country where there was no negative campaigning, because Brooke and Tsongas respected each other so much. But
Tsongas,
that's a long time
both
ago.
those guys, and Tsongas I knew personally, and boy, you missed the day. God, Paul Tsongas was if you're gonna get the regular guy running for one of the biggest offices in the country, you couldn't get a more regular guy. He shows up with no staff, throws his jacket down. Hey Dan, how you doing? Jump in the studio. How's the family? What's going on? We lost him way too early. We lost him on two levels: his humanness, his existence on the planet, obviously, but the way he ran and the way that.
I agree with you, and I bring that up because I think it illustrates. I mean, Tsongas was a great guy. I agree with you. He was one of a kind. But it was an entirely different political world at that point, just 40 years ago.
Has a social media pressure and all of the polarization we have now would have sucked Paul Tsongas into? You think? I guess so, right?
Yeah, it's pretty difficult to avoid it these days. I mean, it's all encompassing in politics. You've got to raise money. The donor world out there is highly polarized, much more so than it was. The media is so highly polarized now. It was not the case back then. There are a lot of factors feeding into it. And when we talked about tribalism before, and you said it's not just party, one of the things that has happened over that period of time is a realignment that's brought ideology and party into alignment with each other in a way in which they had not been in American politics for a very long time. Meaning that the Republicans have moved to the right, the Democrats have moved to the left. It's very difficult to exist in our political institutions now sitting in that moderate middle. When there were people like John Chafee in the Senate, there was a moderate Republican who could build majorities in the Senate from the middle.
And it's happened because what? The people demanded? It just naturally ended up getting there? Does the American public want, a more middle approach? I'm confused.
Yeah, I think when in the abstract that people express a desire for a more moderate approach, But out there in the political environment, they respond to these more extreme messages.
Well, draining the swamp, getting rid of the establishment, is something, though, that seems to be commonality between the two polar opposites. They both run against establishment from very different places.
Right.
Which I think leaves a lot of people in the middle wondering.
And then they get elected and become the establishment.
Well, always.
Yeah.
Meet the new boss, same as the old boss, right? All you got to do is listen to the Who. When we come back, we'll talk about Roy Moore. Because everyone's talking about Roy Moore. Stay with us. Our guest has a really interesting take on this Roy Moore situation and how it inevitably could be resolved, but here's the latest.
When the allegations are made and it's not true, it's also horrible for the person who those allegations are directed against.
Roy Moore's team tried to paint the embattled Republican Senate candidate as the victim yesterday, while aiming to discredit at least one of the women accusing him of inappropriate behavior when he was an adult and they were teenagers. Attorney Philip Jareggi said the only piece of evidence provided by Beverly Young Nelson, a signed yearbook from Moore, might be forged.
We demand that you immediately release the yearbook.
We accept that challenge if there is a hearing that is conducted by the Senate to allow an independent expert to examine the signature in the yearbook.
And new accusations surfaced yesterday, with one woman claiming that in 1991, Moore, who was married, groped her and asked about the looks of her young daughters. Another accuser says in 1977, while in high school, she was summoned from class to the principal's office for a phone call. It was from Moore, who asked her on a date. She eventually went out with Moore, who, she says, gave her a forceful, unwanted kiss. Late Wednesday evening, Moore's campaign put out a letter aiming to affirm his character, with comments from 12 different women who have known the judge for many years.
Do you believe his accusers?
President Trump ignored reporters' questions about Roy Moore yesterday at the White House.
Is he ignoring, is the president ignoring this, you think, because he's just trying to keep his powder dry and weigh in at the right time, or he's just worried about his own personal life and resume?
Yeah, I know. I think it's a real dilemma for him. Both because he shares much of the same political base as Roy Moore does.
He actually supported his opponent in the primary.
He did, but he made it pretty clear that he was convinced to do that by advisors, and he regretted it, and he very quickly endorsed Roy Moore
because it's always somebody else's
after
fault.
that primary. Well,
Right.
that's right.
Right.
But I think now he's got that shared base with Moore. That's one of his problems, and the other one is his own story. This is going to bring it all up again. You know, reporters are going to ask him, "Do you believe these women?" And if the answer is yes, well, how about the women that accused you?
Well, reportedly, the polls have flipped, and Roy Moore is behind right now. But it seems to me he's going to stick it out all the way. He's going to go down in flames.
That seems to be the case.
But go ahead.
And I wouldn't take it as a given that Doug Jones is going to win that seat. I mean, the door is open, which is a remarkable thing in its own right, and there is polling that suggests that he's ahead now. But this is Alabama. It's a very red state. There's still almost a month to go. So I wouldn't assume that this seat's going to flip over to the Democrats.
And there's also a significant distrust of the media
exactly.
in this constituency. So, and unless there's, calling the girl to the office and getting a date and trying to kiss her and that kind of thing probably ain't going to do it. It just doesn't seem, it just becomes noise. You have a specific theory, though, on what ought to happen should he win the election.
Yeah.
You've written about it in national publications. Tell me.
Yeah. Well, I'm not alone now. I did write about it, but now there are members of the Senate who have suggested the same thing, Republican members of the Senate, which is if he's elected, the Senate is the Senate, although under the Constitution the Senate would be the final judge of the qualifications, the Supreme Court has ruled that qualifications in that context just means constitutional qualifications to run, age, residency, and so forth. So they very likely could not deny him that seat and make it stand up. But they could, there will very likely be an ethics charge brought, and then the matter would be referred to the Senate Ethics Committee, and the Senate could, with a 2/3 vote, expel him.
Well, could the ethics charge be a former act?
Yes. Well, presumably,
Is
yes.
there any kind of equivalency to double jeopardy? I mean, look, everyone knew what these claims were, but they elected him, and so it doesn't qualify as a new ethics charge to bring a senator under scrutiny.
Yeah, there's two arguments there that you're conflating a bit.
Okay.
I mean, one will be these things happened 40 years ago, and the Ethics Committee of the Senate has no jurisdiction unless it happened after he was a senator. Not necessarily true, but that is the argument that will be made. The other one is simply the question of the interceding election and whether the now being duly elected by the electorate in his home state in a circumstance in which all of this material was known and they went ahead and elected him anyway, is it then appropriate for the Senate to be considering expelling him from the body? In other words, overruling the electorate of the state of Alabama. I think they may very well do it.
Is there a constitutional flavor that actually this is fascinating stuff, by the way. Is there a constitutional flavor that allows the Senate to portray itself almost as a private club where certain characteristics for admission are necessary?
Well, Article 1, Section 5 says that the Senate is the final judge of the qualifications of its members. They, for example, can examine whether there were problems with elections, and that often not often, but has come up numerous times where they've looked at that, where there were problems with the election process itself. And this question of qualifications, the reason I mentioned that Supreme Court case is because prior to that, it was always considered that qualifications included fitness to serve and good moral character and characteristics like that. But in the Adam Clayton Powell case, you may remember him, the congressman from New York, a judge held him in criminal contempt. He stayed out of the country. He was reelected. The House of Representatives moved to deny him the seat, and the court ultimately said you can't do that. You can only consider these narrow qualifications. So when I look at that, I think that if the Senate tried to deny him the seat, that ultimately that would not stand up in court. But the movement to expel, they've done. And just in the years that I worked in the Senate, there were two big expulsion debates, one in the 80s and one in the 90s. The one in the 80s was Harrison Williams, the senator from New Jersey, who you may remember got caught up in the Abscam matter.
Right.
And it went all the way to a big floor debate. When it became clear that he was going to be expelled, he withdrew. So there's only been 15 expulsions in the history of the Senate. 14 of those were for senators that were involved with the Confederacy. And the 15th one was a matter back in the 1790s. So it's been a very long time.
Well, one of the
1890s.
things that may affect this process is the concept of those who live in glass houses perhaps should not be throwing stones. We'll talk about that when we come back. All right, so the new news is Al Franken's jammed up having did one of these in a joke with a young lady. Look at this. I mean, Franken, you know, is a comic at core, and so I'm sure he's thinking, oh man, what did I do? Reportedly, he practiced kissing this young lady in theater practice for whatever skit they were doing. And so he's a little situation, and of course Bob Menendez in New Jersey just had his trial, which has got nothing to do with sexual activities, got to do with bribery. You know, the old-fashioned real stuff.
Yeah.
You know, it's almost like I'm almost relieved to talk about Menendez. Like, oh, you know, that one's easy. That, you know, that
just
no
bribery.
big deal. You know, he was just doing a benefit for a 25-year-old friend. That was the charge. But he beat that in a mistrial.
Right.
I'm guessing the prosecution will quit.
I don't know.
Who knows?
I don't know. Often they don't.
And I wonder, as a
So-
Jersey guy, trying to get my mind around where people are, whether they'll re-elect him. He might
And
just.
he's up for re-election, so
And I'm guessing he's going to run.
he's giving every indication that he is.
And Franken's got his little problems. So going back to your really interesting discussion on the Senate's options to expel Roy Moore should he get elected to the Senate body, are some of them in the back of their minds thinking, all right, this is right down the cliff. This is a snowball we just don't need.
Yeah.
Because don't
Yeah.
think that the press and the public and opposition research aren't going to redig on things that may have just been about many U.S.
Right,
senators. You'd
right.
hope that that wasn't the case, but I think common sense tells you it is.
Yeah. Well,
What's your
if this
thought?
comes to an ethics committee investigation, of course, Roy Moore will then be called to testify under oath, which of course will give him the opportunity to convert things which are now horrendous stories, but 40 years in the past and well beyond the statute of limitations.
Well, I don't recall. It seems to be a predictable answer to a lot of questions, don't you think?
Yeah, well, perhaps, but you know, under oath before a congressional committee, you have to be careful. It's a federal crime.
But to my point, do you think there'll be a
to lie to
hesitancy
them.
amongst the rank and file U.S. Senate not to pull that trigger because they worry about their own issues?
By pull the trigger, you mean actually expel him,
Yes.
vote to expel him.
Yes.
I think the Republican caucus will be divided on that, and the question is, will one side of the division be large enough, along with the Democrats, to in fact expel him?
Well, with only 30 seconds left, I always ask you for a prediction. Do you think they will?
Well, I think if it comes to that, I think they'll expel him.
Well, there you have it. Professor Arenberg has laid down the gauntlet on that one. It's good to have you. Thank you very much. Tell you about what's up tomorrow night. One of these guys who wants to be in that chamber will be here. Speaking of the U.S. Senate, former Rhode Island Supreme Court Justice Robert Flanders announced yesterday, actually this is Thursday, yes. If it's Thursday, it's, well, anyway, Bob Flanders will be here tomorrow night. We record him on Thursday, sometimes I get confused. But the full show dedicated to the U.S. Senate candidate running against Sheldon Whitehouse. Ought to be a dandy. See you on the radio tomorrow on Friday on WPRO as well. Thanks for watching.